"You're about to make the most expensive mistake of your career," the woman said quietly as the tow truck's hydraulic lift locked beneath the wheels of her dark blue sedan. But Officer Ethan Brooks only laughed, folded his arms across his chest, and nodded for the driver to keep going. Around them, the sidewalks outside the Jefferson County Courthouse buzzed with the ordinary rhythm of a busy Tuesday morning. Attorneys hurried toward the entrance carrying leather briefcases. Reporters adjusted camera tripods beside the courthouse steps. Office workers balanced coffee cups while checking the time on their phones. No one expected that a simple parking dispute was about to become the beginning of a legal battle that would end one man's career. The flashing amber lights reflected across polished windows as the tow truck slowly lifted the vehicle from the curb. Ethan watched with quiet satisfaction. To him, this was more than enforcing parking regulations. It was about reminding someone he believed didn't belong that rules came first, at least the rules as he chose to interpret them. The woman stood calmly beside the sidewalk, her charcoal business suit perfectly pressed despite the warm Alabama morning. She carried herself with remarkable composure, one hand resting lightly on a leather portfolio while the other remained relaxed at her side. She never raised her voice. She never argued. She simply watched every movement with steady eyes that unsettled anyone willing to look closely. Ethan mistook that calm for surrender. "Next time," he said with a smug grin, "find somewhere else to park before you hold up traffic." She glanced briefly toward the courthouse entrance where the large marble columns cast long shadows across the plaza. "My vehicle is legally parked," she answered. "You still have time to stop this." Ethan shrugged. "Funny. I already decided not to." A few pedestrians slowed down to watch. Someone lifted a phone and quietly began recording. Another passerby exchanged uncertain glances with a coworker before stopping near the courthouse fountain. The tow truck operator hesitated for just a second, looking from Ethan to the woman as if sensing something wasn't quite right. Ethan noticed the hesitation immediately. "You have an authorized order," he snapped. "Finish the job." The operator nodded reluctantly and continued securing the vehicle. The woman lowered her eyes for a brief moment, almost as though she were mentally checking off a list. She neither protested nor stepped closer. Instead, she carefully observed the patrol car, the tow truck's company logo, the officer's badge number, and the security cameras mounted high above the courthouse entrance. Even the small dashboard camera inside Ethan's patrol vehicle continued recording without interruption. None of it escaped her attention. A warm breeze carried the distant sound of courthouse bells as another government employee hurried across the plaza. "Ma'am," an elderly man whispered while passing her. "Shouldn't someone stop this?" She offered a faint smile that revealed neither fear nor anger. "Sometimes," she replied softly, "the truth needs a little room to reveal itself." Ethan rolled his eyes. "Save the speeches." The sedan disappeared completely onto the tow truck platform as its steel restraints clicked into place. Satisfied, Ethan signed the final authorization form with a bold flourish before handing it back to the driver. "Take it to the impound lot." The truck pulled away, leaving only faint tire marks on the pavement, and a growing silence among the people who had witnessed the exchange. Ethan believed he had just taught an ordinary woman a lesson she would never forget. He had absolutely no idea that within the next hour, every signature he had written, every word he had spoken, and every camera quietly recording the scene would become evidence in a lawsuit that would be studied in police departments across the state. The courthouse clock struck exactly 9 o'clock as Naomi Carter walked through the front entrance with the same composed expression she had worn outside. She did not hurry after the tow truck, and she did not stop to argue with anyone about what had just happened. Instead, she adjusted the strap of her leather portfolio and continued toward the security checkpoint as though nothing unusual had interrupted her morning. Several courthouse employees greeted her with polite smiles, but she simply returned each greeting with a quiet nod. Across the lobby, marble floors reflected the soft glow of the overhead lights while the steady rhythm of footsteps echoed beneath the high ceiling. Lawyers reviewed case files. Bailiffs exchanged schedules. Clerks organized stacks of documents behind polished counters. It appeared to be another ordinary day inside the courthouse, yet outside, several witnesses were still discussing the unusual towing incident. A young law student who had recorded part of the exchange quietly saved the video to cloud storage before slipping the phone back into a briefcase. An elderly veteran who had watched everything unfold shook his head and spoke softly to his wife. He could not understand why such a routine parking question had escalated so quickly. Neither of them realized their observations would soon become valuable testimony. Meanwhile, Officer Ethan Brooks climbed back into his patrol vehicle feeling unusually pleased with himself. He leaned comfortably against the driver's seat, completed the electronic incident report, and selected violations from a drop-down menu without giving the situation another thought. To him, the paperwork was merely another task to finish before lunch. His body camera continued uploading footage automatically through the department network, preserving every word exactly as it had been spoken. Ethan never considered that technology remembered details people often forgot. He started the engine, glanced once toward the courthouse doors, and drove away convinced that authority had prevailed. Inside Courtroom 4, a judicial assistant arranged neatly labeled case files across the counsel tables while a digital display listed the morning docket. Reporters slowly filled the public gallery, anticipating a hearing involving allegations of official misconduct within the city government. Several representatives from the Civil Rights Division quietly entered and took reserved seats near the front. Their arrival attracted little attention because they blended naturally among attorneys, investigators, and court personnel. Naomi entered a private conference room adjoining the courtroom, where two colleagues stood waiting beside a large table covered with organized binders. One attorney looked up and noticed that she no longer carried her vehicle keys. "Everything all right?" he asked. Naomi placed her portfolio on the table and answered with complete calm. "My car has already become part of today's evidence." The room fell silent for a brief moment before another attorney looked toward the window overlooking the courthouse plaza. "Was anyone recording?" Naomi offered a slight smile. "More people than the officer realized." She opened her portfolio and removed several neatly organized folders, placing them beside a legal notebook without any sign of frustration. There was no anger in her voice, only quiet certainty. She believed that facts always spoke more clearly than emotions when presented at the proper time. Outside, another courthouse security camera continued storing every second of the morning activity. Traffic cameras had also captured the tow truck entering and leaving the block. Dispatch recordings documented the authorization request. Every timestamp aligned with remarkable precision. Without knowing it, Ethan had left behind a perfectly connected trail that required no exaggeration, no speculation, and no dramatic confrontation. It simply required patience. And patience, Naomi had learned many years earlier, often became the strongest ally justice could ever have. The hearing was scheduled to begin in less than 20 minutes, but long before the judge entered the courtroom, an unusual sense of anticipation settled over the building. Attorneys exchanged quiet conversations in the hallways while courthouse staff reviewed schedules one final time. Naomi Carter remained focused on the legal files spread neatly across the conference table. Every page had been carefully prepared long before that morning. The towing incident had not changed the purpose of her day. If anything, it had reinforced why the hearing mattered. One of her associates glanced toward the courthouse window overlooking the parking area. "The tow company has already left," he said. Naomi simply nodded. "Good. That means every step followed a documented timeline. She closed one folder and opened another containing departmental policies, municipal towing regulations, and public records concerning previous complaints. Her team had spent months preparing for a case involving accountability and equal treatment under the law. None of them expected the morning itself to produce another example before court even came into session. Across town, Ethan Brooks parked outside a neighborhood coffee shop during a short break. He greeted another officer with the confidence of someone convinced he had handled a routine situation correctly. "Had to deal with another driver who thought the rules did not apply," he said while stirring cream into his coffee. The other officer shrugged. "Anything unusual?" Ethan laughed quietly. "Not at all." She tried to tell me I was making a mistake. He took another sip before adding, "People always say that." Neither officer realized several notifications had already reached different city offices requesting preservation of surveillance footage from the courthouse district. Digital systems quietly archived dispatch audio, traffic camera recordings, and security video exactly as required by policy. No one edited anything. No one needed to. Facts often became stronger when left exactly as they occurred. Back inside the courthouse, members of the public gradually filled the gallery. Reporters reviewed background notes, while photographers adjusted camera settings outside the courtroom doors. A court clerk walked through the hallway calling the docket number, reminding counsel to be prepared. Naomi gathered her files, thanked her colleagues, and walked toward the courtroom entrance with measured confidence. Her calm presence naturally drew respectful greetings from prosecutors, defense attorneys, and courthouse employees alike. She responded to each with professional courtesy, never mentioning the events outside. She understood something many people forgot during moments of conflict. Credibility was built long before anyone stepped into a courtroom. As she approached the front of the courtroom, a young intern quietly whispered to another employee, "Is that really her?" The employee nodded immediately. "That is District Attorney Naomi Carter." The intern looked surprised. "Was she outside earlier?" Before anyone answered, the courtroom doors opened fully, inviting everyone inside. At almost the same moment, Ethan's patrol radio crackled with a routine dispatch requesting his presence near the courthouse for supplemental documentation connected to the towing report. He acknowledged the call without concern and turned his vehicle back toward the government district. He expected nothing more than another signature before moving on with the rest of his shift. As he pulled into the familiar parking area, he noticed television news vans lining the curb and far more official vehicles than usual. The plaza seemed unusually quiet despite the growing crowd. Conversations became softer as people recognized familiar faces entering the building. Ethan adjusted his uniform, convinced he was walking into an ordinary administrative follow-up. He had no reason to believe that only a few doors away, the woman whose vehicle he had ordered removed was already taking her place at the counsel table, preparing to let the law speak with a voice far stronger than anger ever could. Officer Ethan Brooks stepped through the courthouse doors expecting nothing more than routine paperwork, but the atmosphere inside immediately felt different. Conversation stopped for a fraction of a second as courthouse employees recognized him from the incident that had unfolded less than an hour earlier. He noticed the attention yet dismissed it as ordinary curiosity. With confident strides, he approached the information desk and informed the clerk that dispatch had requested supplemental documentation regarding a towing authorization. The clerk politely nodded before making a brief phone call. "Please have a seat for a few moments, Officer Brooks," she said. "Someone will be with you shortly." Ethan glanced around the spacious lobby, where polished marble reflected the morning sunlight pouring through tall windows. Attorneys moved briskly between courtrooms carrying neatly organized case files. Reporters quietly reviewed notes, while photographers waited near the entrance. Everything appeared orderly, yet an unusual calm seemed to hang over the building. It was the kind of silence that often arrived just before something important unfolded. Inside courtroom 4, the gallery had nearly filled. Every seat reserved for attorneys, investigators, and city officials was occupied. Naomi Carter organized the final documents before her with remarkable precision. Her legal team exchanged a few quiet observations, but no one discussed the towing incident directly. There was no need. The evidence already existed exactly as it had happened. It required no embellishment and no emotional argument. Truth had a remarkable ability to preserve itself when enough people witnessed it. A courthouse administrator entered the room carrying a folder marked with the morning's schedule. After speaking briefly with the bailiff, he walked directly toward Naomi. She reviewed several pages, signed one acknowledgement form, and thanked him with a calm smile before returning her attention to the files. Across the room, several visiting attorneys quietly recognized her and greeted her with visible respect. A young assistant prosecutor leaned toward another attorney and whispered, "She has been preparing this accountability hearing for months." The response came just as quietly. She never overlooks details. Outside in the hallway, Ethan finally received instructions to bring a copy of his electronic towing report to an administrative office adjacent to the courtroom. Still unconcerned, he walked confidently through the corridor, passing framed photographs of former judges and district attorneys displayed along the walls. As he approached the office, he noticed an increasing number of officials entering the same section of the building. Representatives from Internal Affairs, Municipal Legal Counsel, and several senior court administrators gathered nearby. Ethan assumed they were attending an unrelated proceeding. He could not imagine that the events of his own morning had quietly become part of conversations taking place only a few feet away. The bailiff opened the courtroom doors and announced that proceedings would begin in 5 minutes. Everyone inside immediately rose to prepare. Ethan happened to glance through the partially open doorway while waiting outside. He saw the attorneys arranging documents, reporters settling into their seats, and court staff making final preparations. Then his eyes rested on a familiar charcoal business suit seated confidently at the counsel table. For a brief moment he frowned, trying to understand why the same woman from the parking area occupied such a prominent position inside one of the courthouse's most important courtrooms. Before he could ask anyone, another employee walked past him carrying additional case files and spoke casually to a colleague. "District Attorney Carter is ready whenever the judge takes the bench." Ethan's confident expression slowly faded. The words echoed in his mind with growing weight. District Attorney Carter. He looked through the doorway once more. The woman he had dismissed only an hour earlier did not acknowledge his presence. She simply continued reviewing her documents with complete composure, as though she had expected this moment all along, leaving Ethan to confront a realization that had only just begun to unfold. The announcement that the judge would enter in 2 minutes spread quietly through the courtroom, and everyone took their assigned places with practiced efficiency. Officer Ethan Brooks remained outside the doorway, unable to take his eyes off Naomi Carter. Only an hour earlier she had been standing beside a tow truck on the courthouse plaza, speaking with calm confidence while he dismissed every word she said. Now she sat at the lead counsel table surrounded by experienced attorneys, investigators, and legal staff who clearly recognized her authority without a single introduction. Ethan replayed the conversation in his mind, searching for something he might have missed. Had she ever identified herself? Had she threatened him? Had she raised her voice? The answer to every question was the same. She had done none of those things. Instead, she had simply given him an opportunity to reconsider. He had refused. Inside the courtroom, Naomi reviewed one final document before closing the folder and placing both hands quietly on the table. Her expression remained steady, free from satisfaction or resentment. She had spent years building a reputation based on preparation rather than emotion, and she understood that every decision carried consequences beyond a single morning. One of her senior attorneys leaned toward her. "The preservation requests have all been confirmed," he said softly. Naomi acknowledged him with a slight nod. Every available recording had already been secured according to standard legal procedure. Courthouse surveillance cameras had captured the entire interaction from multiple angles. The patrol vehicle dashboard camera had recorded the exchange without interruption. The officer's body camera had documented every statement exactly as spoken. The tow truck company had already confirmed that its onboard recording system automatically stored every service call. Dispatch audio preserved the authorization request with precise timestamps. Even traffic cameras overlooking the intersection established the exact sequence of events from the moment Ethan first stopped beside her vehicle until the tow truck departed. None of those recordings had been requested because anyone expected a dramatic confrontation that morning. They were preserved because evidence mattered, especially when public trust depended upon objective facts instead of conflicting memories. Meanwhile, in another office, the city's legal counsel quietly received notification that several citizens had voluntarily submitted witness statements through the courthouse reporting system. Among them were a retired school principal, a law student, a delivery driver, and 2 courthouse employees who happened to observe the exchange while arriving for work. None of the statements appeared coordinated. Yet every account described the same sequence with remarkable consistency. Each independent observation reinforced the others until the entire incident resembled pieces of a completed puzzle rather than isolated opinions. Ethan slowly lowered the report folder he had been carrying. For the first time that morning, he realized the situation had moved far beyond a routine towing authorization. Every decision he had made existed beyond his own recollection. Every sentence had been preserved by systems designed to protect accuracy rather than assumptions. Across the hallway, the courtroom doors opened fully as the bailiff announced the arrival of the judge. Everyone inside rose together. Naomi stood with quiet professionalism, waiting respectfully for the proceedings to begin. She never glanced toward the hallway. She did not need to. The evidence would speak without anger. The witnesses would testify without exaggeration. The recordings would play without bias. Standing alone outside the courtroom, Ethan finally understood that authority could compel compliance for a moment, but documented truth possessed something far more enduring. Once it began moving through the legal system, no confidence, no explanation, and no badge could persuade it to change its story. When the judge entered the courtroom, every conversation faded into complete silence. The room rose together in a practiced display of respect before everyone returned to their seats. Sunlight streamed through the tall courthouse windows, casting long bands of light across polished wooden benches and neatly arranged counsel tables. Naomi Carter remained composed as the clerk announced the docket, her attention fixed on the documents before her rather than the growing number of people filling the gallery. Reporters prepared their notebooks, city officials exchanged quiet greetings, and representatives from several oversight offices settled into reserved seats. The hearing began with routine procedural matters, but beneath the orderly rhythm of legal arguments, another story was quietly unfolding beyond the official agenda. In the hallway outside, Officer Ethan Brooks still stood motionless, trying to process what he had just learned. The confidence that had followed him through the morning had slowly given way to uncertainty. He replayed every sentence spoken outside the courthouse. Naomi had never demanded special treatment. She had never mentioned her title. She had never attempted to intimidate him. She had simply asked whether he was certain about his decision. At the time, he had interpreted her calm demeanor as weakness. Now he recognized something entirely different. She had trusted the legal system more than she trusted an argument on the sidewalk. Moments later, an administrative supervisor approached Ethan with a professional expression. "Officer Brooks," he said, "we need you to remain available after the hearing. There are several administrative questions regarding this morning's incident." Ethan nodded automatically. "Of course." The supervisor offered no additional explanation before walking away. The brief conversation lasted less than 30 seconds, yet it carried more weight than any discussion Ethan had experienced all day. Inside the courtroom, testimony continued with careful precision. Every statement focused on facts, timelines, and documented evidence. Naomi listened attentively, occasionally making handwritten notes in the margin of her legal pad. She never appeared distracted by the events outside, even though everyone closest to her knew exactly what had occurred before court convened. Her discipline reflected years of experience. Personal frustration never belonged in a courtroom. Evidence did. During a brief recess, one of the investigators quietly approached Naomi and placed a slim folder beside her. "Additional preservation confirmations," he whispered. She opened the folder just enough to review the summary page. Every requested recording had been successfully secured before any automatic deletion schedule could affect the files. Digital timestamps matched dispatch records to the second. Public surveillance footage aligned perfectly with body camera recordings. Independent witness statements continued arriving throughout the morning, each reinforcing the same sequence of events without contradicting one another. Naomi closed the folder with the same calm expression she had maintained since sunrise. She understood that justice was rarely built upon one dramatic moment. More often, it rested upon dozens of ordinary facts fitting together with quiet consistency until the truth became impossible to ignore. Outside the courtroom doors, Ethan noticed courthouse employees walking past him with respectful greetings directed toward Naomi whenever she entered or exited the room. Every acknowledgement reminded him that he had judged a stranger without taking the time to understand who she was or even listening carefully to what she had said. For the first time that day, he questioned not only his decision but the assumptions that had led him there. The realization settled over him with uncomfortable clarity. The morning had never been defined by a parked vehicle. It had been defined by choices. One person had chosen patience, professionalism, and trust in the law. The other had chosen certainty without understanding. Now, as the hearing prepared to resume, those choices were beginning to travel down very different paths, and the distance between them grew wider with every documented fact that entered the official record. By the time the afternoon recess arrived, the courthouse no longer felt like an ordinary government building. Quiet conversations echoed through its hallways, not because of rumors or speculation, but because official procedures had already begun moving forward. Naomi Carter stepped into a conference room with members of her legal team, representatives from the city's legal office, and investigators responsible for reviewing public integrity matters. No one spoke about revenge. No one discussed making an example of anyone. The conversation centered on evidence, policy, accountability, and the responsibility every public servant carried while exercising authority. Naomi opened a thin folder containing only a few pages. "The facts will remain exactly as they are," she said calmly. "We do not need stronger facts. We only need complete facts." Every person at the table nodded in agreement. One investigator confirmed that the chain of custody for every recording had already been documented. Another explained that witness interviews would begin that afternoon. A third official outlined the standard process for reviewing potential policy violations. The meeting lasted less than 30 minutes because the path forward had already been established by law. Outside the conference room, Officer Ethan Brooks sat alone on a wooden bench overlooking the courthouse plaza. Through the large windows he could see the same stretch of sidewalk where the morning had begun. It looked ordinary now. People crossed the street carrying briefcases. A delivery truck stopped briefly before continuing down the block. The tow truck was gone, leaving almost no visible sign that anything unusual had happened there. Yet Ethan understood that appearances often concealed consequences that unfolded much more slowly. His patrol radio remained silent while he waited for further instructions. For the first time in years, the passing minutes felt unusually heavy. An internal affairs lieutenant approached him with professional courtesy. "Officer Brooks, we will need your body camera equipment after your shift concludes. This is a standard preservation request." Ethan quietly acknowledged the instruction. There was no accusation in the lieutenant's voice. No raised volume. No dramatic confrontation. Only established procedure. Somehow that calm professionalism unsettled Ethan more than anger ever could have. He realized no one needed to argue with him anymore because the recordings would speak for themselves. Back inside the courtroom, the hearing resumed. Naomi continued presenting carefully organized legal arguments unrelated to the events of that morning, demonstrating the same professionalism she had displayed since arriving at the courthouse. She never referenced the towing incident before the judge. She never allowed personal circumstances to distract from the matter currently before the court. Watching from the gallery, several younger attorneys quietly observed her discipline. One whispered to another, "That is what professionalism looks like." The other simply nodded. Leadership, they realized, often revealed itself most clearly when someone possessed every reason to react emotionally yet deliberately chose restraint instead. As the afternoon progressed, official notifications began reaching the police department, the municipal legal office, and the towing contractor requesting preservation of all records connected to the incident. Emails were archived. Dispatch logs were secured. Vehicle location data was retained. Every document followed established procedure. The legal system moved. Deliberately, almost quietly, yet each administrative step carried lasting significance. Standing once again near the courthouse entrance after the hearing concluded for the day, Ethan watched Naomi leave the building surrounded by colleagues. She did not glance toward him. She did not celebrate. She did not offer criticism. She simply walked toward another waiting vehicle arranged by her office and continued with the remainder of her schedule. At that moment, Ethan finally understood that true authority never needed to announce itself with louder words or stronger gestures. It simply trusted that when every fact was examined with patience, the truth would eventually arrive exactly where it belonged. Over the following weeks, the investigation advanced with the steady pace that often defined the American legal system. There were no dramatic press conferences and no public accusations shouted across courthouse steps. Instead, investigators followed established procedures, one document at a time, one interview at a time, one recording at a time. Every piece of evidence was reviewed independently before being compared against department policies, municipal regulations, and sworn witness statements. The consistency of the record quickly became impossible to overlook. Every camera showed the same sequence. Every timestamp aligned. Every witness described the same calm professionalism displayed by Naomi Carter, and the same confidence demonstrated by Officer Ethan Brooks. There were no significant contradictions to resolve because the facts had quietly preserved themselves from the very beginning. The city attorney's office soon recognized that defending the incident in court would become increasingly difficult. Attorneys reviewed hours of video footage, dispatched communications, body camera recordings, dashboard camera files, and official reports. Independent legal consultants reached similar conclusions regarding the risks of prolonged litigation. The issue was no longer a disagreement over a parking space. It had become a question of public confidence, equal treatment, and whether official authority had been exercised with fairness and sound judgment. Internal Affairs completed its administrative review according to departmental policy. Supervisors examined Ethan's report alongside every available recording and interviewed everyone directly involved. Training records, departmental guidelines, and previous performance evaluations were considered as part of the review process. Each step followed standard procedure without unnecessary delay or public spectacle. Ethan attended every required meeting with growing humility. The confidence that had once shaped his decisions had been replaced by long periods of quiet reflection. Looking back at the recordings, he noticed details he had ignored in real time. Naomi had remained respectful throughout the encounter. She had offered him opportunities to reconsider. She had never challenged his authority with anger or disrespect. Every opportunity to de-escalate had been available. He simply had not recognized it while believing he already understood the situation. Several months later, the city reached a substantial legal settlement rather than continue a lengthy courtroom battle. Officials announced additional training initiatives, expanded policy reviews, and updated procedures intended to strengthen public trust and reinforce professional standards for future encounters. Community leaders welcomed the reforms, emphasizing that accountability served both the public and the many officers who carried out their duties with fairness every day. Ethan's own career reached a turning point soon afterward. Following the completion of the administrative process, he was no longer employed by the department. The decision was documented through established procedures rather than public humiliation. He left the building carrying a small box containing personal belongings collected from his office, pausing for a moment beneath the same morning sunlight that had greeted him weeks earlier. Across town, Naomi returned to the courthouse for another ordinary day of public service. New cases filled her calendar. New hearings awaited preparation. She never celebrated the outcome because she had never viewed the process as a personal victory. For her, the most meaningful result was that the legal system had functioned exactly as it was designed to function when evidence, patience, and integrity were allowed to guide every decision. As people later reflected on the case, many remembered the expensive settlement and the career that had come to an end. Naomi remembered something different. She remembered standing quietly beside a tow truck, offering one final opportunity for someone to reconsider. Sometimes the most powerful moment in any story arrives long before the courtroom, long before the headlines, and long before the verdict. Sometimes it arrives in the simple choice to listen before deciding, because the smallest decision made in confidence can become the largest lesson delivered by the truth. Nearly a year later, the courthouse plaza looked exactly as it had on that ordinary Tuesday morning. People hurried toward hearings with coffee cups in their hands. Attorneys reviewed case files while climbing the broad stone steps. Reporters waited for the next important story. Life had continued just as it always did. Only those who remembered the events of that day understood how much one decision had quietly changed the lives of everyone involved. Officer Ethan Brooks no longer wore a badge. His career had become a lesson discussed during ethics training sessions and professional development seminars, not because people wished to embarrass him, but because future officers needed to understand how quickly confidence without fairness could become a liability. He had accepted responsibility for the choices he made and no longer searched for excuses. Looking back, he often admitted that the greatest mistake had not been ordering a tow truck. The greatest mistake had been believing he already knew everything about a person he had never taken the time to understand. Across the city, District Attorney Naomi Carter continued serving the community with the same quiet professionalism she had demonstrated throughout the entire experience. New investigations filled her calendar. New legal questions demanded thoughtful answers. New prosecutors sought her advice on handling difficult situations with patience instead of emotion. Whenever younger attorneys asked how she remained so calm under pressure, she never spoke about winning or losing. She simply reminded them that credibility was built one decision at a time, long before anyone entered a courtroom. The legal reforms adopted after the investigation gradually strengthened public confidence. Updated training emphasized respectful communication, careful judgment, and equal treatment for every person regardless of appearance, neighborhood, or background. Supervisors encouraged officers to slow down before making assumptions, while community meetings focused on rebuilding trust through transparency and accountability. The changes did not erase the past, but they helped shape a better future. One afternoon, Naomi happened to walk across the same section of sidewalk where her vehicle had once been loaded onto a tow truck. She paused only briefly before continuing toward the courthouse entrance. There was no bitterness in her expression, and no desire to relive what had happened. She understood something that many people spent a lifetime learning. Justice was never about humiliating another human being. Justice was about ensuring that truth carried enough weight to protect the dignity of everyone who came after. Imagine standing there for just a moment, watching hundreds of people pass through those courthouse doors every day. None of them would know the story unless someone chose to tell it. They would simply see another public building where laws were interpreted, evidence was examined, and ordinary citizens hoped to receive fair treatment. Yet beneath those familiar stone walls lived a quiet reminder that every interaction mattered, every decision left a record, and every act of professionalism could shape lives far beyond a single morning. In the end, the most powerful lesson had never belonged to the lawsuit, the settlement, or the career that came to an end. It belonged to a simple choice offered beside a parked car, a choice to pause, to listen, and to treat another person with equal respect before reaching a conclusion. Some people believe authority comes from a uniform or an official title. That morning proved something very different. Authority may open a conversation, but character decides how history remembers it. Because the badge represented responsibility, the law demanded fairness, and the truth never needed to raise its voice to be heard. He believed the badge gave him the final word. She believed the law would tell the whole story. In the end, the badge disappeared, but the truth remained.